Kia ora koutou katoa. I want to thank Professor Mehana Duri for joining us and for opening with this beautiful karakia. It is our pleasure at the Center for Culture-Centered Approach to Research and Evaluation or CARE to have with us today Professor Graham Hingangaroa Smith. At CARE, we have been conversing over the last 2 years or so about the question of activism in academia and what does activism look like in transforming academia. Particularly, we have been with our Activist in Residence program engaging with the question of the incorporation of culture into the neoliberal instruments of the university so that culture has lost its radical potential for transformation. It is within that context that the conversations and dialogues we have had with you, Professor Smith, have been some of the most enlightening and nurturing. For our global audience, because I'm sure our local audience here does not need an introduction to Professor Smith, but I am going to introduce him for our global audience. Distinguished Professor Graham Smith is a prominent Maori educationalist and advocate who has been at the forefront of alternative Maori initiatives in the education field and beyond. Professor Smith has been an influential contributor to the development of what he has described in his writings as the 25-year Maori educational revolution between 1982 and 2007. This period saw the development of a range of alternative educational strategies by Maori communities, beginning with Te Hingangaroa, through the Maori Immersion Elementary School development, Maori secondary schools, and the emerging tertiary option of Whenua. He has had a hands-on approach with respect to his participation and commitment with these initiatives. In fact, often when we chat, you say that the power of your theorizing is evident in the calluses on your hands, and that is such an important invitation for us in academia to really think about the work of activism and what academic work looks like. Professor Smith was the foundation chairperson of the Council for Te Whare Whananga o Awanuirangi Indigenous University in Whakatane. He has also contributed on a broad front to the New Zealand education sector as a whole, remaining as a leading voice in the challenge for the legitimate inclusion of Maori theorizing within the traditional academy. He has led a concentrated effort focused on producing increased number of Maori students at master's and doctoral levels, and his influence in that sense is felt throughout the educational context. He has built a broad-based international network of indigenous scholars who work with Maori, and his theoretical leadership has informed the emergence of Maori education studies as a distinct entity within the education faculties within New Zealand universities. So for our global audience, here is an indigenous leader who has informed the way in which we think about, conceptualize indigenous education in the context of Aotearoa, New Zealand, but in a global context, offering much leadership and fodder for thought in terms of how to organize the university. Professor Smith has made significant contributions to the political, social, economic, and cultural advancement of indigenous Maori communities within the context of Aotearoa, but also again to the thinking of indigenous organizing in global contexts. It is with that that I invite you, Professor Smith, to come and deliver your talk. Welcome.
I am angry. I am angry that that pepeha was stolen from me. For 15 years, I was without my culture. Colonization took that from me, from my father, from his father, and from his father. When my tipuna married a British settler, they were ostracized by his whānau, and they had to make their own way in their own country. My tipuna stands with me here, as 5 years ago I reclaimed my whakapapa and my culture. Despite the odds of the colonized education system, I found my culture through myself. I did that myself, not with help from this government and the systems they set up to disenfranchise Maori, Indigenous and Pacific communities.
But just to say thank you to Mehana for his opening and being here as the DVC Maori, who is the lead person in a lot of the things that I'm going to speak to today. So the context really is we're aspiring to be a Tiriti-led institution, and that aspiration has with it a number of assumptions and hopes and desires on the part of the staff and our communities of interest. Immediately we say a treaty-led institution, it invokes two partners, and each of those partners, might I say, have different aspirations and different shapes to how they perceive and understand a treaty-led institutional environment. But many of our staff and colleagues are working very positively in taking up this challenge, and I want to acknowledge that. But the discussion that I want to bring forward today is actually a number of challenges that I think immediately accrue around the notion of the Maori treaty partner. What is it that we need to do? How do we reshape ourselves? What are the challenges and expectations that are placed over the top of us as we try and make the most of this opportunity? All right, so I'm speaking to this particular topic around transforming Indigenous education. That title is ambiguous, and it's deliberately so. I mean both elements of it, actually. I mean that we need to transform the processes of the institutional environment, and we need to be transforming in terms of the outcomes of what we do in the institution. So there's this dual expectation. The other part of it is that I want to raise the issue of the need to have a balance between what I call being a scholar, an activist, and a transformer, and the differentiation between each of those weightings, if you like, or positionings will become clear as I go through this talk. But key element why we've got all of these different sort of shapes, if you like, to our purpose is because we need to understand clearly what is not working and what is going wrong in order for us to be able to respond appropriately to make the transforming difference and the changes that need to occur. So where we're at as an institution is that the status quo and the way in which we're doing everything at the moment is not working a heck of well. There's still a lot to be done. Most of us know this and own up to this and want to do something different. So, and for Maori, there's a further expectation that's placed on us by the communities that we purport to serve outside of the institution, who continue to suffer from high and disproportionate levels of socio and economic marginalisation. And that situation hasn't changed for years. And I guess what I'm saying here, there's an expectation on the public spend in public institutions to start to make inroads to some of these areas of need in our community. So in this bifurcated sort of shaping of a treaty arrangement, if you like, of the treaty partner and the non-Maori treaty partner, The part that's still underdeveloped in terms of our community outreach is our Maori community. So there's some attention that needs to be drawn to that point. So we need to, I think, respond to what I call our outcomes production of our work, that we need to focus on what it is that actually changes as a result of the work that we do inside the Academy that impacts our communities. Knowing, of course, that Māori are not homogenous, that we're not all the same, that there's some who are quite happy with the way things are organised, but the overwhelming feeling is that a lot more can be done and in terms of Māori interests. Right, so key thing for me is we need to find a better balance in our workload between our institutional outputs and our community outcomes. By that I mean that often we're structured by the calling and the expectations of our institutional environment, which are asking us to perform research. How many dollars do you bring into the institution? In terms of our PBRF, numbers of publications and weird and strange and wonderful journals that are not read by any of our audiences, but they count in terms of your PBRF ranking and so on. So all of those kinds of things, which is the institutional return, if you like, that the institution gets a return in terms of its ability to raise funds from those indices. On the other hand, I would say that our community outcomes in terms of the impact that we make in terms of change is not as good, needs more work. Right, so this, in this front bit, there's a little bit of just positioning really about the context, but I'll get beyond this very soon if you bear with me. So there's a number of things that I think that effective Indigenous academic work needs to do, and I won't spend too long on this, just pick a couple of points out, but mediate some of the ambiguities in education. There are ambiguities about liberation and colonisation. People are still working out, is coming to the university a colonising experience or is it a liberating experience? And it's got that duality to it, and we need to be clear about how we mediate that. I'm not saying that we get it right all the time, but we need to understand it and to engage with it. The tension between outputs and outcomes, theorising and practice. Often we get accused of being jacuzzi intellectuals, doing our theorising from Cheryl Smith's jacuzzi. Yeah.
He pātai anō? Is there more questions?
Kia ora. Is this? Yeah, that's totally working. Kia ora, Aroha. I really enjoyed your kōrero. While you're talking, you said that there's a $42.6 billion economic base for Maori, and I just did some little number stuff. That's $71,000 for each of us, and I don't know about you, but I work with a lot of Maori in prison, and they don't have $71,000. And so what I'm asking is, if there's so much money out there and it's in Māori hands, but most of us don't have it, what do we have in common with people who do have that? Is the class division in Māori society reaching the stage where we can definitively say maybe we don't have anything in common with these people anymore?
Just pātai anō, can you just ask your question a little bit louder? Sorry, it's quite hard to hear. Can we get the mic turned up a little bit, please?
And then the last thing is that we need to be more transforming in our intent and move beyond what I call the privatised academic approach, that construction, where it's all about me and my promotion, and the privatised academic sort of is held to the belief in the meritocratic principle of education. That is, you go to school, you learn, you get good credentials, you go out, you'll get a good job, and then you'll buy a flash Mercedes-Benz like Jeremy, and and it's all about me and my bank account and so on. We lose sight, if you like, of that responsibility, that outreach to a broader community of interest. And that notion is, if you like, I'm putting the privatised academic up against the notion of the public good responsibility, which is diminished. So I want to begin with positionality and just locate myself in this trilogy of callings, if you like, of activist, scholar and transformer. I wasn't always would class myself as an activist. When I went to University of Auckland, I was just lucky that all my colleagues, there were about 30 of us at University of Auckland at the time, were all in the Maori club. Colleagues at that time were Sid Jackson, Tamaiti, the who's who of the what I call the transforming world at the time. I came from a private boarding school, and as I alluded to in my early story, we were very good boys from that. And so had to become conscientised, if you like, by rubbing shoulders with my colleagues at that time. So not everyone's born into this, that we come to our activism, conscientisation, if you like, the appropriate mindset by different pathways. Anyway, so at the time in the 1960s, 70s and 80s, I had a pretty long university career as a student. And, there are a number of things that the civil rights movement, the women's movement, Black Power, anti-Vietnam protests, Ngā Tamatoa, Polynesian Black Panthers, the 1981 Springbok Tour, some of those we were involved in. And some of them, our colleagues took the forefront, if you like. So these are colleagues of my time when I was there. In that top photo on the right, there's Tamaiti, Ringo Orr here, Paul Kotara, Orewa Barrett in the next row, Rawiri Paratene, who's Marama Davidson's dad, and a few other. I'll put Pedagogy of the Oppressed there because actually, that was a book when I read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, a whole lot of things fell into place for me. It gave a language to all of the things that I'd felt in my upbringing and growing up, and the things that was very hard to explain. So simultaneously, at this time, I'm also doing academic work. I was doing a master's there. The only Maori students in doing masters at the time were Toda Eduwela, who was head of Ngā Tamatoa, and myself, working with Anne Salmon. But it called me to read critical theory, because critical theory, following the war, was attempted to try and explain why Mussolini and Hitler and so on were given so much support and so on. So there's a lot of critical work done to unpack a lot of those politics, if you like, and it was shaped as critical theory. So we had a good dosage of that. Post-colonial theory, again, same thing. A lot of readings around Fanon and the exiting of, or the independence movements of different countries around the world at that time, which created a critique of colonialism. And also for me, the new sociology of education, which looked at education as a process and began to critique the structures of education. Prior to this time, most of the explanations for educational underachievement or underdevelopment was there's something wrong with the learner, something wrong with those Maoris, they can't speak England properly, or there's, you know, they too many kids in the home, too many relatives living in the same household, poorer jobs, poorer income, and you know, it was sort of focused as a cumulative cycle of deprivation that entrapped Maori, which impacted in schools and learning opportunity. And but the new sociology of education, because we did a lot of interventions which were around deficit theory, and nothing was moving. And then the sociology of education said, we need to ask some questions of the structures of, okay, what about, is there something wrong with the curriculum? Is there something wrong with the way that we teach? Is there something wrong with the broader structures of knowledge in education? And these questions began to unlock some important elements and also got some movement in the learning domain.
This government is failing tauira, both Māori and non-Māori, and I recognise that in every single system across our country. Queer suicide rates, rangatahi mental health, gun violence, child poverty, the foster care system, incarceration, all can be prevented if you understood the obligation to te tiriti and upheld that across our systems. Decolonise our systems.
I was based in Auckland. Massey was going through a major growth spurt in the 70s.
Okay.
Needed sociologists, and they were moving from appointing sociologists from overseas to appointing local sociologists. So in that year, Steve Mahari and I were appointed to sociology here as part of that both growth of sociology, but the sort of indigenisation, meaning New Zealandness, not tangata whenua, but the New Zealandness of sociology. And then, of course, again, one of those events that prompted my interest and Steve's interest was quite soon after we had the Springbok Rugby Tour.
Oh, true.
And it split the society in ways that were very profound and quite difficult to understand now, but it was about racism.
Yeah.
It was about the role of tangata whenua, it was about rugby, and it was about national identity.
Yeah.
Yes. Can I think it's a really important question, and I want to address it in a very specific way, and that is that I'm Pākehā. So, you know, we've had our hegemony for a very long time. It feels very uncomfortable to be challenged in certain ways and to feel that somehow we are not going to be able to maintain our hegemony. Sorry, perhaps this is a better word, but our hegemony.
But just in summarising this first piece, when I look back, I think there's 4 key learning journeys that I undertook as an emerging scholar at that time. One was about personal, political and critical conscientisation, coming to know for myself. That's the Frere stuff and the language and being able to understand that. And then the next important piece was really working out how my personal conscientisation might be enjoined with other people's consciousness to create, if you like, a more public or collective movement for change. Now, that comes out of the mouth pretty easily, but actually it's a really significant element. How do we mobilise collective action to make change that's meaningful. And so having to learn how to do that and to begin to participate in movements, if you like, that we're doing that kind of thing. So this, to cut to the quick here, the change really is a shift from conscientisation to transforming outcomes. How your mindset actually links to making the change that's required.
So the people that I continue to work with and live with and act with hope, we're always thinking of ways that we can try and, even in this depressing time, how we can keep taking action that's useful and meaningful. In my life, in this history I've just given will show it. This isn't my theory, it's an old theory that's been around a long time, but in some ways I've lived the reality of it, that there are three main ways of creating change in our lives. From outside the system, throwing rocks, demonstrations, occupations, frontline activism. The long march inside the institutions, which I guess most of you are engaged in here at Massey, or the long march inside local government or council or the National Parliament, or in the public service. There's lots of places we can make change, and people are.
So my theory work is informed by practice. I do not speak about things that I haven't done myself. In this sense, the validity of my academic work is not just the writing outputs, or the voicing of my ideas. My academic credibility is to be also seen in the blisters on my hands. Moreover, I want to position myself within my work. I do not pretend to write in the third person. I am implicated in my work and own my claims and assertions. I freely admit that I am not always academically objective. And in this sense, I'm exporting, if you like, the responsibility for objectivity and neutrality, not from what I say, but onto the reader. You make the judgment about my work. I often ask my students in the front of their PhD theses to take this as part of their methodology. Right, so again, my final comment, so colonisation hasn't gone away, just changed shape. And often those shapes are neoliberal in the way in which that's being formulated. That is, there's an intersection between cultural oppression and economic exploitation. And so we need to just understand that as we work our way through this. But, you know, 4 elements that I think that we can do immediately, which is, I think, create the academic connectedness with our community struggles, those that are struggling, because it is conscientising, and that's the point I think I was raising about rubbing shoulders with Sid Jackson and Ngā Tamato and Tamati, all of those early activists, is that we learnt a lot. It was, again, I think those opportunities, so, and I've put there Te Ata Kura, because a lot of people probably don't know about that youth movement that Ronnie is involved with, which is working with a lot of young Maori leaders. And again, part of that is a conscientisation movement. Uhu Mātao, and that struggle there, that is a conscientising movement about, you know, the living treaty today. The COVID responses from our iwi are all, again, formative sites for transformation. So the other thing is, I think that we need to be more deliberate and intentional about teaching critical studies in our, and particularly in Māori studies. We've talked about that as a possibility moving forward, but I think across the whole of our institution, you know, different disciplines that can take a different slant around that. But again, it's not the be all and end all, but I think it's it certainly connects with where the treaty partnership idea. And we need to be able to produce students who are useful to our iwi and can work in, particularly in this emerging climate of post-treaty sort of, I don't really want to say settlement. It doesn't come out of my mouth very easily because I don't believe that it's full and final for a lot of our iwi who are still developed and responded to. So, but in that context, and for us all inside our institution, we need to work hard, very much like has happened with in our responsiveness to promotion, build structural and policy accommodations that are positive and proactive in developing new alignments for Māori outcomes. And my final word is, we won't have a sustainable revolution of our social, cultural and economic conditions without a prior or simultaneous education and learning revolution. Kia ora.
Me kia ki rā i mua i a mātou e honua tapatia nei tēnei rā. Just a few comments from me, and I'm not sure if there is a question in this Hingangaroa, but firstly to acknowledge the significance but also the criticality of what's been shared with us today. I think it's a seminal précis of our history, our contemporary realities as Māori, but also a roadmap for our future. And I think that's what's really important about the presentation. It's so moving to see our tupuna back up on the screen and to see all of the things that they achieved and did in their time, but also the legacy that's been passed on. And I think very much about the work that you've done as an architect of kaupapa Māori, both as a movement, but also as a way of living and a philosophy. And that's probably my question to you today, in terms of education and looking ahead, and in reflecting on what I think is probably the imposition of a Victorian age education system that's rooted in the industrial era, acknowledging the role that kaupapa Māori has played in transcending that. What do you think the future looks like for these ones who are now coming into an age where kaupapa Māori is normalised as part of both a system and a way of living? What do you think the future holds for these mokopuna and tamariki, some of whom are here today? Kia ora.
Kia ora. Well, first of all, can I say that the profound change that has occurred is that it is now possible, if you did a bit of dancing, to do an education totally in te reo Māori all the way through to a PhD, and which is something very new. So I think for my part, again, picking up on the point that Māori are not homogenous in terms of what they might desire and where they're at, is that what we want to have is some excellent options in different pathways. And, you know, if it's not my idea, but the neoliberal said let the market decide, if that's the case, then you know, we have lots of people who actually are still unsatisfied with the options that they have in front of them and would like more of a, if you like, a Māori option that reflects their interests, their lifestyles, their backgrounds, and where their iwi are at the moment. So, but again, you know, I think that when I go overseas and look back at New Zealand, we're doing, you know, compared to other countries, a pretty reasonable job. I don't want to say that too loud because people take it and think they've done it. But actually we're doing a pretty good job in terms of the options that we have available, and people are often envious about what we're doing. But we've still got a long way to go, and that's my point, is that here we have an institution that's prepared to change. It's put wearing its heart on its sleeve, if you like, in terms of the treaty-led ambition. I think, you know, we're not going to get everything straight away, and it's not going to be, but I think it's a great utopian vision to build towards, if I can put it that way. And I think that's important.
Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to ask you a question then, Brian. You talk about transforming the neoliberal impulse that has colonized universities in the contemporary context. So what are some specific things we can do in terms of challenging the privatization of the academic that we talk about?
So, you know, I think immediately that we need to somehow reform the idea that the individual is paramount. It's all about individual freedoms and individual rights, because Maori, whether we like it or not, belong to whānau, belong to hapu, iwi. They're collective entities, so we have, if you like, collective responsibilities. We're not if you like, an entity unto ourselves. So I think we need to find ways in which we can challenge that, you know, so that again starts to speak to the structural accommodation, the policy accommodations around what counts as academic work, you know, and to broaden our definitions of that, to include some of our collective expectations and behaviours, to understand how, you know, I haven't talked about power. I deliberately kept away from some of the hard-line critical elements, but, you know, unequal power relations, the co-option of the notion of equality, and as being, you know, it's all about equality, that is the level playing field. And whereas, you know, we're more concerned for equity, that is, there is a need to get beyond just seeing everybody the same, that our aspiration is to be the same as everyone else. When we're starting a long way back, we need extra, if you like. Some people need extra, not everyone, but some people need extra to, if you like, create an opportunity. So, you know, that whole idea of equity needs to be interrogated, because it's used as a great gatekeeping device. So the gatekeeping part of it is we must treat every New Zealander exactly the same. And of course, if the ship's already tilted and we're treating both sides the same, the ship remains tilted. And so what I'm saying is that in some cases we need to create, if you like, a compensatory form of equity for some parts of our community that need to be given a fairer opportunity and chance. So at the moment, you know, we're not interrogating these sort of ideas again, that sort of, but, you know, that's one of the great, if you like, gatekeeping devices of the neoliberal project.
Thank you so much, Professor Smith, for sharing your wisdom with us. I would like to invite you, Professor Dury, to say your words of closure.
Right.
Ka tiaki, I would like